in your own story. So you are being a participant observer within a different frame. And the way that we explore that is through writing in dialogue. It's how active imagination developed, Jung's work. It's how great philosophical work developed. And the art of writing in dialogue. We talk about the questions being daimons on a quest. That research is made of questions, and the questions are the daimons around you. And some of them will be terrific big questions, big daimons. Some of them will be little ones. Some of them will be quite mischievous. Some of them will enchant you. Some of them will annoy you. Some of them will come in with great big boots on and ask the tricky question. And if you start to practice the writing in dialogue, as my students have been doing, they've been astonished at how the other voice comes through. And there's quite a tension to hold. It's not a therapeutic action, remember. It's to learn and become adept at a particular modality. But it's quite delightful how the work takes shape through this kind of cooperation activity of writing in dialogue. The final part there is about the more, the kind of correspondences. As if we imagine this as a whole apprenticeship unfolding from your map and your psychological activity through the kinds of disciplines you'd undertake in order to experiment with it, through the kinds of things you might make and the sorts of things you could add to it, going right the way around the Ouroboros. These sorts of extras, I call it rescuing the drowned books because I love The Tempest. And I wrote a piece about Miranda grown up, going back to the island, and what she's after are the drowned books. Of course, the staff as well. She's after the drowned books, and she wants to reclaim something about all this fabulous image language, which has been transformed in the watery element. Okay, now that's one. What I'd better do is glide a little bit, because let's just have a look at, this was the second point. We've had reanimating. This is remembering. The daimon becomes a place. You've seen the daimon as a personage. The daimon becomes a place. And this is the Kabbalistic tree. It's a beautiful illustration. And where these fabulous... This is a cosmology, of course. Those who know Kabbalah will know that we're seeing the cosmos set out for us in relationship, not simply as spheres, perhaps concentric spheres, as you'd see in the Anima Mundi presentations, but with all sorts of interconnecting relationships between them, so that each becomes a pathway of consciousness. Now, this is what the Western mystery tradition was doing. So I was spending 7 years travelling around here, like going around the world, as it were. And what we were talking about, the 24th path, being the imaginative intelligence, is this one. So it's actually located. So part of imaginal inquiry is not only knowing to whom you're speaking, which is an important point in archetypal psychology, who's speaking and to whom are you speaking, but where am I? Which is a sort of plea, isn't it? Where am I? Where am I within the tree of relationships? And when I was exploring this, I was doing my PhD, and I actually called it the Imaginal Tree. But then after that it had a boring bit of title, which was about psychological study of active imagination as education. And what happened was pretty grim, really, as it is with PhDs. It was quite a few years ago. And I had such a wonderful vision of having done all of this mystical, meditative work, journals piled high, all sorts of experiences. And it was like going through the underworld. What happened was that my supervisor had no idea how to deal with something operative hands-on and practical. What I did was I created a course which would do guided visualizations to take people on a journey around some of these paths with all sorts of correspondences. And I put these guided visualizations, meditations, what would you like to, on tape, and I ran it as a course for several years, adult education type course. I had enormous fun with it. People kept journals and that. And this was my research about this course, teaching it. And in the end, with my supervisor nagging me all the time about you've got to do more about the background of cognitive psychology and so forth, I ended up with the entire Imaginal Tree course was the appendix. Everything I'd done was the bloody appendix. And I had this huge tome which was exploring the autobiographies of people who'd written about multiple intelligence in the cognitive, what I call the cognitive mountains, the high up, because I did a lot to do with space. It was a lot to do with, depth psychology is depths, well, height psychology is heights. There isn't one in the middle, actually. That's what I hope Imaginal study would come to be. But I had all the cognitive heights, which have all dried out, and all the boring cognitive mountain, which you have to climb and then fall off, like people like Jung and Hillman did. Then I had all the depths, and then I ended up going deeper still into the Renaissance, and then I had Ficino in there and Pico in there, and it got bigger and bigger and bigger, as these things do. It was impossible to stop the monster. It was just gross and stomping about the house, taking over absolutely everything. And I was arguing for an image intelligence, which was my term for really the transcendent function, alchemy, transformation, and vision. And it ended up simply, all of my best bits were in the appendix. So when I turned this into my course, I called it Madnesses in the Method of Remembering. And I made a big point about the need for the ontological shift from universe to cosmos. I didn't know enough at the time how epistemology and ontology must go together. If you're revisioning your theory of knowledge, you must revision where you stand in response to it. It's a shift from, Hillman describes this, from universe, which is that empty, meaningless place, to cosmos, which of course is the meaningful, interconnected, animate and animating world. Entering the imaginal ground, learning from inside the image. And it's moving into the beginner's mind of what I call the priestly fool. Now, there's lots of story in there. I'm not going to go into any of that. But you can see that the beginner's mind, those of you who know the phenomenological material, the importance of bracketing, of being able to question our own assumptions. It's part of relationship, isn't it? Not to bring to it all the rubbish from all the bad quality and distorted or out-of-date stuff that we already have in our minds. So the psychology of good relationship is an ability to question and bracket a great deal of our assumptive background, things that we've taken for granted. And we need to learn to do that. And that's where the psychological component comes. We can be guided into this, what's called the beginner's mind, the freshness of making new starts and seeing things a little more clearly. Corbin, of course, talks about bringing things to the light. Consciousness then as a place for state-specific inquiry. And people like transpersonal psychologists like Charles Tart have been talking about this for a long time. Things like conventional science, fantastic as a state-specific science. It suits particular types of phenomena. And there are other state-specific sciences as well. We need to cultivate our imaginative eye, undertake the practice of visionary imagination, and what we explored in further was to remember, and remembering means putting the body back, isn't it? The substance, the play on words. What you're standing on is the substance. It's your understanding. is what you're standing under. Your substance is where you are standing. And we've talked about remembering melothesic or zodiacal man, how we're a microcosm made in the image above and below, the hermetic balance. Okay? So this is what gives us our setting, our element earth. Isn't this a wonderful alchemist? I'd much prefer, this is on my course, we wouldn't be using these sorts of words. What we'd be doing is spending a day with an image and letting the image teach. You see, the alchemist's head is in the centre there. And actually the planets are around. They've got little feet. It's fabulous. The entire cosmos is there embedded. Okay. So those are the two most important, I think, the epistemological, the ontological. I'll show you briefly, then, what the other three are. And I hope that will tantalise you a little bit. And then you'll want to go onto my website. They aren't even there yet in this format, but I'll put it up for you to see, or you can read about it, because it is an entire course. There's restorying, where we understand the daimon not only as a person to meet, as a place to enter, but also as a process to experience. That's the emphasis on it. I wrote a little piece when the gods were intelligent and education was enchanting. That is on the website. The therapeutic empire I've mentioned, I just don't want to go there, actually. But look at the difference in the British Psychological Society's image of psyche. Quite stiff. And, you know, they even had to have in their journal, they had to have somebody, only quite recently, write an entire piece on, well, what is this image? Nobody knew. I'm not making that up. Nobody knew what the image was. It's Psyche about to pour oil on Eros and wound him, you know, which is typical, exactly what sort of conventional. And I speak from well inside the psychological world, where I have studied and taught conventional psychology for years, and taught conventional research methods in psychology for years, statistics a lot. So I know about that. And where is this, please? Where is the passion and the divine kiss? Where's the story? You see, this is another lovely thing that Hillman gave us, where he says, you know, the psychological contribution is psyches. Psychology should be about psyche, and therefore it should be about Psyche and Eros and their passionate love and their separation and Psyche's initiatory activities until she is rejoined with Eros. Because that's what it's about. That's what makes it worth it. That's what's lovely. To tell stories of embodied and experiential knowing. So we have restorying is the third of my bits of mischief. And the way it turned into, out of psychology, into my course, was about myths in the method of restorying. And it's a teleological reframing, this one, into mythos. Gives us orientation. If we haven't represented something to ourselves, how can we orient to it? This is Corbin. We have to repair relationships. So this is our psychology. We're entering then, after our phenomenological discipline, we're entering our hermeneutic circle of high story. If you hyphenate history, it becomes the high story. A story and allegory. So we're actually connecting with Angelo's work, which has very nicely picked up on the modes of exegesis. We're cultivating here an imaginative ear, mythologizing, and I wrote some pieces on travels with this amazing personage, Lady Alchemia. This is the personification of alchemy, and because my course has been all about alchemical, it's transformative study, we've not been doing just history of alchemy, we've looked at the travels of Lady Alchemia through metallical time, up through history. So this wonderful being, this is the air. Her hair is fire. Her eyes are the sun and moon. This is virgin's milk, the white, that changes everything to poetic ground. The chameleon and the eagle, the two substances. We spend a day with this. So I'm just showing you, my friends, it's like a cocktail party, so we have to move on. But these are Travels with Lady Alchemy. This is about myth and finding the myth, sensitising to story. So many students don't understand the story, and then you discover, my goodness me, it's the story of Bone Woman. I've been collecting all these awful dry fragments. I sit down and I start to sing them into song and story, and they develop into a wolf that runs off. And it happens to them. Look, this is another one. This is where, I call it representing, where inquiry became imaginal. This is my love. It's one of my great friends here. Somebody said to me, why don't you do what you love? It's that simple. But I thought, well, I will do what I love, actually. Why am I forever doing what I think somebody else would like me to do, or what I ought to do, or what will fulfil the accreditation requirements and the re-evaluation requirements of this, that and the other, and putting them first? Why don't I do what I love? And so I did. I started to do that. I faced the art-science challenge by positioning the course as humanities-based, but operative. Taking science as scientia, the knowledge that informs your art, not getting into the punch-up between is it science or is it art. We took reveries. We go into this golden garden. We walk along this wind-swept path to talk with the philosophers. We cross this starry water. We enter this temple of the triple fire. We actually do it. We make it present to ourselves. It's to do with materialising spirits of inquiry. I wrote a piece where all the ladders start, where I was beginning to own up to having an esoteric background. And I wrote a piece called Inviting the Image to Teach, which just began to talk a little bit about that. It turned in the course into the muses in our representing. It turned into a reframing of theory, mathesis, which is sacred learning, sacred geometries. We were into intimacy and dialogue. There's literature now on art as inquiry. Artifacts becoming talismans is my addition to that. I have a student who right this minute, I'll be finishing in a minute, right this minute, I think it was yesterday at the astrological moment of Beltane, was grouting a zodiacal mosaic she's made. It's taken a year. And she's hand-cut each piece of it. And she's been to collect the dew, as the alchemist would, every morning for the last 2 years in little bottles. She has enough to mix that alchemical dew with the grout, and is then grouting a mosaic as a sacred act. And this will be her artifact for her MA dissertation. I called it spatialising initially to reconnect the above and the below. I then later discovered Corbin's wonderful term, imaginalising. Hillman takes us from the literal up to the imaginal, as it were. He helps us de-literalise from our plonky, over-literal world. What Corbin does is add on what was difficult for Hillman, until the very end, when he had to reapproach this a bit. What Corbin does is take the above and help it to materialise into the intermediate. So whereas Hillman therapeutically, as it were, releases us up, this is the necessary angel, releases us up to the imaginal, if you take a spatial metaphor, to deliteralise, what Corbin enables us to do is to bring the intelligible through to the imaginal, so that we can engage and encounter the great meeting place of the imaginal. And so we have the muses there, and what we're doing is remaking that broken staff. Prospero's staff, I'll break my staff, bury it several fathoms, and deeper than ever did plummet's sound, I'll drown my book. And then Miranda comes back to get the drowned books, and to remake that broken staff, that axis mundi, that cultural split. Hillman would say our great cultural burden, the split between the senex and the poor. Age that cannot teach, youth that cannot learn. And I said Miranda's job is to hold that staff, the broken pieces together, recreate the axis mundi, and in so doing, be able to unfold this fabulous, this lovely alchemical tree. I've got a presentation of the liberal arts in an esoteric frame, like sacred geometry, not ordinary geometry, and of course many other things. Yeats is my favourite here. He said, the chief difference between the metaphors of poetry and the symbols of mysticism is that mysticism, the symbols are woven together into a complete system. And I think that's one of the big things. There's a system there. So this is what I did. I rejoined them all. All the things we've been talking about come up into this sort of presentation. I've got dozens of these. Those are circles. And here's the square, which is a temple. It's a plan for a temple with 5 altars. And we talk about rejoining. Think of that as your 2 eyeballs. How about that? Sudden switch to Metatheisic man. If that was your 2 eyeballs, you've got your left and right eye, solar and lunar eyes, depending whether you're male or female, which way round they'd be. So you've got 2 kinds of vision, the circle and the square. And the idea in alchemy is we need to square that circle. That's one of our aims. And we make a memory theatre. I call them magics in the method of rejoining. We reframe our techne, our practice, into initiation. So we have performative knowledge. We marry inquiry to the old arts of ritual, ceremony, and magical practice. The loving fool opens the transpersonal way. Becoming the image. The practice of immortalizing. Now, you might read that in wonderful old Mithraic ritual, but it's in the story of Psyche, isn't it? It's what happens to the soul when she's united with her love. She becomes immortal after her tasks. Element fire. And that's something the students made. That's my last slide to show you. These are the 5 different methods. You can see there's a lot there, but it doesn't matter because you're an ant. You've only got to take 1 grain away with you. And perhaps a nice picture. These are some of the things in one of our celebratory end of semester activities. They made 5 altars in the memory theatre, which was the entire classroom. And they made a ritual of these 5 elements of inquiry, which you'll have seen are the earth, the air, the water, the fire, and in the centre, this reanimating quintessence. They aligned them with all sorts of things. And they can remember them because it's a memory theatre, and the ritual enables them to embody the knowledge. So they have enormous fun. Thank you. I have a few copies of that, which is my advert. And I've got them just like this, little tiny tickets, if you'd like to take one, anybody.
Thank you very much for ending on that lovely imaginative note. So we'll maybe just have 1 or 2 questions, and then William and I will just come and we'll have a kind of final summing up, regrouping, whatever you want to call it. And I'd like to ask Marie anything. It's difficult to frame intelligent, rational questions after being kind of put into a slightly different space.
There's a lot there too, isn't there? I mean, it's rather a romp.
Maybe the question's not quite the right way of approaching it.
See what daimon? See the questions as daimons. I'd just love to show you lots of examples, but I'm going to put more on the website for that.
So,
it's not a question, it's a comment, I think. It's just delightful for students to get an inspiring teacher, and that was very inspiring. So I'm sure your students must be delighted to be able to come in and have a lecturer who says, go ahead. here's your shape. Off you go. And I'll be interested, and I'll love what you bring. Show me something. And rather than, this is the structure, follow it or else.
Yeah.
And I think only a teacher that's been through, when your appendix was, but who's been through it can offer it.
Yeah, and it does operate as a very solid method too, because the students are producing a celebration of the rational mind as well as others. So they're working, I think, sometimes 4 times as hard as other people, because yes, there is a really good bibliography, and yes, they do proper Harvard-style referencing, and yes, they have brought that in, but it's as part of the discipline of creating imaginal dialogues. It's I think, is it Pico? Or no, or maybe it was Giordano Bruno who said it's about cooperating with the archetype. It's not imposing on the archetype or being lived by the archetype. It's cooperating with. And that's a very delicate art that takes place in the middle. It's imaginalized. Okay.
I understand your course is coming to an end, formally speaking. Is that correct? And if
It is, yeah.
And if so, how do you see it? Do you see yourself carrying it forward? And if so, in what form? Or others carrying it forward? Or how do you see the future?
Yeah, it's only coming to an end because I simply had no support from the system, particularly, right. And I had to do everything. And I never had a day off all those years. Yeah. All the marketing, all the everything, all the teaching, all the lot. I could easily have kept it going if I'd have had a few more friends who could have joined in and things like that, if it had been made possible. And there's plenty of people interested. I am continuing by running things privately, and I, as a psychologist, because I've got counselling and business, all that sort of thing, I can offer people continuing professional development, which is certificates and diplomas in that side, and support people doing other academic work. And it could become an MA again if I was willing to go through the underworld again. But there is a bit of a sense of, having had the naive esoteric experience and then being rather angry with myself for not questioning. I mean, the tarot card you saw is from the Moroccan Fez set. And when I first got that, we had to go to London specially to a secret shop, even to buy that. It's all those years ago. It was so secret. And, joss sticks were weird things as well. And anything to do with occult behaviour was so peculiar. And it's still quite inhibiting for me to say, I've done that, and yes, I was interested in the Golden Dawn, from where a lot of the concordances come, and so I did the whole Golden Dawn study and all the rituals of the Golden Dawn, and have been participant in all of those in all the different roles. So have a lot of experience in that, and that was only one strand of the kind of esoteric work, which I still do, and of course is private, and one doesn't go on and on about those sorts of things, but it's the most important thing I do. And it's like I've never said it. It's like I've never dared to say. And academics are beginning. Susan Greenwood at Sussex, who's an anthropologist, I think, has just started saying, on becoming an owl. I did it. I became an owl in a shamanic experience. This is little snippets. But anyway, I'm sorry, you can tell I could talk for England, so I apologise for being a bit over time when you're tired.